All right, let's move on then to the presentation of the draft for the downtown Waupaca parking plan. We have some individuals here tonight. I know we have some of your steering committee that's in the audience and also some people that are interested. Brennan, I just want to tell them that we are going to give you the opportunity to make some comments after we have the presentation. So again, try and hold questions until we have the question and answer part of that presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. This evening we have a representative from Sam Schwartz Engineering making a presentation to you guys regarding our downtown parking plan. Many of you are aware of, kind of hopefully kept you guys up in the loop a little bit. We started this project actually last year, probably about early August last year. We ended the visioning plan and we adopted it in May at council level, and we entered into a contract to Sam Schwartz shortly thereafter to do a parking study for downtown as one of the recommendations coming out of there. Also, it was a prerequisite as we move forward with the downtown redevelopment plan and also the reconstruction of Main Street. We needed a better understanding of our parking needs in downtown. There's a lot of perceptions out there that there's not enough parking, not enough parking, so we wanted to answer a lot of those questions and get a better handle on our parking situation as a whole in downtown. We engaged Sam Schwartz Engineering. They conducted 3 different parking counts throughout the end of the year on 2015, which Kelly will get into. But this evening it's just the draft plan, and we intend to bring this forward to council on the 19th of April. The next meeting, I believe, is the 19th of April for adoption of that plan, and then this will tie in nicely with the council just awarding contracts to our downtown visioning, our downtown redevelopment planning firm, and also our marketing firm. So with that, I will let Kelly kick off the presentation.
Thank you. So Brennan recapped pretty well, so I'll just kind of dive right in. The outline of the presentation, I'll just give an overview of the study overall, the community input that we received, a summary of that, what we actually looked at in terms of data and analysis, the key findings and metrics we used to evaluate that, and then options and recommendations. And as Brennan said, I just wanted to put out there that this is, our first stab at in working with Brennan and the steering committee on a preliminary set of recommendations, and we hope to come out of this meeting with a little bit of more direction on if we're heading in the right way, or if in addition, it's not necessarily all recommendations. There's also options that we're presenting to get feedback on. So an overview, and as Brennan has already mentioned, the purpose as we see it was to evaluate the data that we have collected through 3 data sets, recommend some parking management strategies that would help Waupaca currently and in the future as you continue your vision plan to overall improve walkability, because as you'll hear me mention throughout the presentation, walkability and parking are 100% interrelated. And then, separately, we wanted to look at the impacts of potential changes to Main Street in sort of how parking is oriented. Approach, we looked at a 20-block study area as part of the scope. We collected 3 sets of data collection that included 4 days. Actually, we looked at 2 days in August prior to Labor Day. We looked at a day in October, a weekday in October, and we also looked at a December weekday in order to capture holiday shopping, if you will. We received community input, which I'll go through separately, establishing sort of the existing baseline demand and how the community perceives the parking issues, and then projecting future conditions, which I'll talk a little bit more about once we get to that point, but coming up with some preliminary strategies to address the parking issues, and then coming back with recommendations and an implementation plan. So community input. This part of our scope consisted of a business forum meeting where the downtown business community was invited. We had some mapping exercises. We had a polling, interactive polling, which all the results will be have been summarized and will be available within our report. This Plan Commission meeting for discussion and feedback. We conducted about 8 key person interviews, both in person and on the phone. We have conducted, and during the October data collection set, we did an in-person intercept surveys while we were performing that data collection and talking to people walking on the street and asking them a few questions about parking. And then we had an online survey that's been available for, actually I think it's over 3 months now, with 285 responses as of yesterday. So that is a phenomenal response, actually. This is far more responses than we get for communities that are 3, 4, 5 times this size. So that's very impressive. A little brief summary of the key points that I took away from both the survey and feedback from the business community and our key person interviews. Talking about preferred diagonal versus parallel parking, this was a big topic of conversation amongst the public, all related to the orientation of these spaces along Main Street. So we directly asked the question, was there a preference in this type of space over off-street parking, perpendicular parking, parallel parking, on-street versus off-street? And the response of 60% had a preference of diagonal parking over other types of parking. And in responses that were actually fill-in responses, comment responses, a lot of the comments was the ease of pulling into the parking space, the ease of access in. In some of the exercises that we did with the business community, we determined that there was mapping exercises where there were space preference choices, and through that exercise, there was a determination that proximity to your final destination and the number of street crossings, the number of intersection crossings actually influence the parking space over the space type. There were comments about, not feeling very comfortable crossing the street and that kind of thing, which we'll get into a little bit more. About 74% of respondents find it acceptable to walk 2 blocks or more from a parking space to their destination. This was determined mostly from the online survey where a question was given on the actual walk shed that people are willing to park and willing to walk. So there were various choices given, and this was the determination. About 6% of respondents felt that it was difficult or a deterrent. Parking was difficult or a deterrent to coming downtown. This was determined from questions that asked about the ease of parking in a rated response. Employee utilization of prime on-street spaces. This was determined from key person interviews, from feedback, from in-person feedback, as well as comments that were filled in on the online survey. And something that came up time and time again was traffic flow along Main Street. Many people felt like it was too fast, in particularly between Badger and Fulton. They felt uncomfortable with the speed of traffic. They felt like it was more of a highway than a downtown. And then there was also several comments from both the business community and customers about the perceived connectivity of Main Street to the blocks off of Main Street, and they felt like it was very disconnected in terms of streetscape and lighting, these perceived barriers that we'll talk about in a little bit. This is basically just a reiteration of what I just wrote through. This was the comments that we got from the business community. And then I just wanted to go through the analysis. I have a lot of slides on this, but I will try to run through it because sometimes I get just in too much detail. So speed me along if you would like. We looked at a whole range of data sets. We like to start from the very beginning to really build a demographic of the community in our minds, since every community is very different. We looked at population by age because specifically there were comments about needing to accommodate an older demographic perhaps than some communities. And in fact, you can see there's a very interesting mix here of age groups. A lot of 80+ females. I have never seen a graph that looks quite like that. And a median age of about 40. This is in comparison to maybe in Appleton, I had that number. In Appleton was 33.8, Milwaukee 31, Oshkosh 33.5. So it is, an older demographic than an urban, larger community. Journey to work, we always look at this data just to get a feel for what's happening in the community in terms of traffic. 80% drive to work, drive alone to work. Interestingly, about 5% walk, which is great for a community of this size with limited public transportation. And carpooling was about 9%. Mean travel time, 15 minutes-ish. Those were all important things. Traffic counts, we looked at this just to get an idea of what really is happening on Main Street. And the key point here just being, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, the travel, the flow of traffic is Badger to Main to Fulton and back. The traffic volumes on Main Street drop drastically north of Fulton. Crash data. We obtained crash data from the police department. We looked at data 2013 to 2016. We basically grouped it into either turning or angled accidents, accidents related to parking, and bike and rear end, and you can see those crashes that were mapped. You're seeing the data from 2013 to 2016 now, but we felt like it was very important to point out that 10 of the 17 reported crashes 2013, and I should say this is just, we gave the defined area of the 20 block study area. This isn't Waupaca as a whole. But 10 of the 17 reported accidents were related to someone backing out of one of the angle spaces in downtown and either backing into a parked car, or there was a pedestrian incident, or getting rear-ended as traffic approaches on Main. Parking supply. So we went through and inventoried all of the parking. This as part of the data collection effort, grouped those parking by designation, time limit, the type of space. You have about 1,300 parking spaces total in the 20 block area. 780 of those are public, the rest being privately owned. And these were mostly just the larger parking lots. We didn't necessarily count every parking spot on every alley or anything. So 580 on-street spaces, about 200 in municipal lots. And then we determined that about half of all of the public spaces are diagonal spaces, and that breakdown is approximately half on Main and then half off Main on Fulton, Union, etc. Seasonal demand, and this is a breakdown of those traffic count, the seasonal traffic counts that I mentioned. the 2 days in August, the weekday in October, the weekday in December, you can see from this information, Saturday is lower than the weekday counts, but overall, you have no seasonal variation whatsoever. They came out amazingly the same within 3 vehicles. But the peak is technically the August weekday, so that was the data that we used to evaluate, that we used as the basis of our analysis. And you can see this is the graph of the parking spaces over that weekday in time, the peak being right around the lunchtime at about 295 occupied spaces. That's in the bar at the top is the 779 of supply. So the light blue, these colors are really hard to see actually, but the peak, the line that's labeled peak 295 is the total of the other 2 lines. The other 2 are the breakdown of lots and on-street spaces. That's a 38% occupancy of the total overall 20 block study area. And based on information that we were given for our building inventories in the downtown, that is an overall parking demand, peak parking demand of about 0.85 spaces per 100 per 1,000 square feet. And this comes into play a little bit later, but and it's important to note that based on that, also on that building inventory, your supply of public spaces is right about 2 per 1,000 square feet. And then we mapped the peak occupancy by block face. This chart shows the mapping of those occupancies by block face. The different colors represent the percent occupied, 0 to 24, 25 to 49, 50 to 84, and 85 to 100. So the things to note here, I guess, would be that there's generally not, there are some blocks that are what we consider to be fully occupied during the peak, and certainly at other times you have full occupancy. But interestingly, they weren't the ones along Main Street. They were blocks that maybe had fewer spaces, and all 2 of the spaces were full. And then the lots are also shown in the same way, the percent occupied. Future needs. So part of our scope was to also look at future needs of parking. And the model is somewhat limited in that the data we have is sort of a flat growth model. We don't have location-specific redevelopment at this point. So what we did was we looked at a min, mid, and max scenario, looking at what's your overall peak demand of the community, which actually only happens during that noon hour, but that 0.85 vehicle demand per 1,000 square feet, we applied that to a min, mid, and max scenario. And those scenarios being 50,000 square feet of growth in the downtown, 100,000 square feet of growth in the downtown, and then 200,000 square feet of growth. And these graphs show sort of the comparison of what your current demand would be, the increase of what your parking demand would be with that 100,000 square feet and the 200,000 square feet. And then the supply at the top is still the 779. Just to note, the information we have is a vacancy rate of about 100,000 square feet in the downtown. So that's kind of how we came up with the min, mid, and max scenarios. But I did want to point out that this analysis is only looking at public supply. So the assumption is that anything that is built or filled or occupied of that square footage, the assumption being that no new parking would be built for that use. This would be using all existing public supply as it is now, which, as you knew, it may or may not be the case. but it presents a conservative scenario that says, hey, even if we don't add any parking, this is the demand versus the supply. And then we felt it wasn't enough to, look at the 20-block study area as a whole, because really it's not operating as a shared parking situation for 20 blocks. So we broke down the study area into walk zones based on the feedback that we had gotten from the community. So what you see in front of you is the zones that we broke it down. It's based on a 2-block walk shed model. And we sort of started from Main Street and worked our way out. So it's what we feel represents, each of the different colors represents the area that we feel is parking that is shared by the uses within that building. That's not to say that a use on the edge of that wouldn't use parking on either side, but that is the limits of the model. So in as much as you have a destination smack in the middle of the zone, you also have a destination that's on the edge of a zone that actually has use of parking supply on another zone. So we feel the model is pretty representative and can accurately or can generally give you ideas of your surplus and demand. So here's the breakdown of what the surplus is by zone. We looked at the capacity of that zone, the peak occupancy of the zone, and then determined either the surplus or deficit that is served by the area. I have 1 second here. So what this basically shows, and this is also adjusted for about a 5% cushion and circulation and so on and so forth, just to give a little more conservative estimation to the numbers. So, overall you have about, in all of the zones together, you have about 470 space surplus in the downtown. Every zone technically has a surplus also. The zone D is where you see the lowest surplus at about 50 parking spaces available at any one time. And that's basically, that zone in particular is because we did not, all the other zones have off-street facilities that are assigned to it. And zone D, we did not assign the parking, the off-street municipal lot on Union to that zone. Which we can talk about later, but we felt it was the most conservative way to approach it because of the feedback that customers feel that parking facility is perceived to be a little bit more difficult to get to because of various reasons, which we'll get into. But the point of this slide is that there's no area within downtown where you have any less than 50 parking spaces available at any time within 2 blocks. Duration and turnover, we also looked at how long are people parking in these spaces, how often are these spaces turning over, because as I'll get to in a little bit, this is very important in your prime parking spaces, as the business owners of course know. So we looked at the 4 blocks of Main Street between Badger and Granite. About 66% of the parkers throughout the one-day survey that was conducted, about 66% parked for less than an hour, about 23% parked between 1 and 2 hours, and then only 11% were basically in violation of the 2-hour time limit. And I say 11% because this is actually fairly good for communities that do not have a meter parking pricing. 11% is actually fairly good for just relying on enforcement to have that turnover. Overall, the spaces are used on average about 3 times per day. 4 would be kind of your goal. And that's basically just because you have a 2-hour time limit, and between 9 and 5, you don't want anyone to stay over 2 hours. So that's 4 vehicles using a space per day, and that's very typical for a commercial area is what the goal should be. So we mapped these space by space and car by car to get an idea of the intensity of how these spaces are turning over, and that's the graphic you see to the right. It's nice to kind of see, you know, the orange and the red, and even the yellow, that are in violation of the 2-hour time limit really hinder the turnover of that space. The spaces that have the blue and the green have a much higher intensity of turnover. Just pointing out, you know, the importance of the turnover. So now I want to present sort of our findings, but the more so the metrics that we use to get to the findings. This is a graphic that I like to show every community because I think a lot of it gets lost when you start talking about large commercial development sites versus downtowns. This is a 250-foot walk shown to scale, basically in comparison to each other, of the pick and save versus downtown. And you can see that the importance of it is showing 250 feet is a whole different ball game in a large development site versus downtown. And if you took your downtown commercial block and all of its fabulous uses and plopped it down, you still have a parking lot that's bigger than your block. So this is very important to keep in perspective as you start to prioritize the use of land in your downtown. Downtown parking needs, and again, this is a slide on metrics and how we like to look at parking needs. Because this is a commercial district, your priority user is the customer because it's zoned commercial. In a residential area, that would be the resident. Your priority user would be the resident. But customer parking equals convenience parking, which you have to keep in mind as you determine all of your methodologies and strategies. These are convenient parkers that choose convenience over other things. They may not be familiar with the system, so you have to accommodate that. They have varying needs, such as the 2-hour parker versus the 15-minute parker. And these are the people where turnover of those prime spaces are so important, because you have people running in, you have people unfamiliar with the system, and you have to accommodate people that are supporting your downtown business. Perceived safety and walkability really affect these parkers because they're unfamiliar with the system, or because they just want to jump in and jump out. This is where you can really impact the use of the spaces. But at the same time, can't forget employee parking, which has a different use of longer term, and these people are very familiar with the system, so you can take advantage of that. Resident parking, of course, you have 80 spaces in downtown. I can't remember the number of units. So resident parking is something very important as well. This is just a slide that I'll run through really fast, just giving you a toolbox of the spectrum of strategies that you can use to approach parking, from building more, which is extraordinarily expensive, to enforcement, which is something that can basically distribute your demand, and is something that's a very low cost thing that that helps your allocation of spaces throughout downtown. Walkability in downtown Waupaca, we noted several things through our own observations as well as feedback. The physical barriers of crossing Main Street, 65 feet of crossing distance on both sides, from either side of Main Street. You have 65 feet of pavement basically that people are crossing. You also have a condition where they have to walk out into the street basically to see around the parked cars, to see any cars are coming or not. And then the perceived barriers. These aren't physical barriers, but they're very much real. The feedback that we got about walking on Fulton and Union doesn't feel as comfortable as Main Street. That may be because of lack of lighting. There may be some business mix and visual cohesion that they just don't like turning the corner from Main Street. So this all impacts what those unfamiliar with the system see as the parking available to them. This is just a slide which I'm going to talk a little bit about how we dimensioned, excuse me, the sidewalk space. Walkability basics. So this slide, I just wanted to run through because this falls into the strollability of downtown and also the supply of parking, because the bigger your walk shed, the more comfortable people are with walking. The bigger your parking supply is because people walk farther to get to parking. These are standards that we follow in the industry. Having 4-foot minimum, obviously for ADA, 5 to 6 feet preferred, but 8 to 12 feet is the standard, the recommended through the National Association of City Transportation Officials. That is the pedestrian thoroughfare, not necessarily the sidewalk width. Pedestrian crossings at every quarter mile to connect your downtown. Crossing standards, and this possibly applies more to your signalized locations, but considering that you have slower walkers, and are your signal timings enough so that those people can cross the street, installing countdown timers as a standard, and then reduce curb radius, because this really affects your crossing distance, which you want to keep as low as possible. What you see on the left is the existing sidewalk, and how we break down the usability of the sidewalk is a frontage zone, the pedestrian zone, and the furniture zone. So within that and it's 10 feet in some areas, it's 9 to 10 feet. You have a frontage zone of about 2 feet where you have planters, people putting out TP signs, door openings in some cases. Then you have about 5 feet of walkable zone, and then 2 feet of the furniture zone where the tree pits are located, which is remarkably small. The trees are growing in there actually. And then on the right shows what you'll see in the later cross sections of an 18-foot sidewalk, where we could fit in a larger frontage zone where you can fit seating areas for cafes and whatnot. Pedestrian zone of 7 feet, which is slightly less than what we typically go with of the minimum 8-foot recommended width. And then a furniture zone, as we show, with 3-foot planters and benches. Relationship to urban design, that being parking relationship to urban design. I just threw this slide in because I wanted to point out that, again, connect the dots between parking and walkability. There's been many studies in the planning world about the connection between economic benefits of walkability. And so this was one of the studies that we had actually worked on in Chicago on the people spots, where they are using parking spots to extend the sidewalk, and the benefits that the commercial businesses are seeing because of that extended sidewalk space, which in Chicago's case, they mostly use for seating, for cafe seating. And then I also wanted to point out the benefits of parking as a traffic calming tool, because a lot of times that's neglected to be mentioned, but I've never recommended, I don't think in my 10, 11, 12-year career, that for parking to be completely removed on a street, because we like it as a traffic calming tool. So, and just summarizing both the data that we collected and these metrics, we feel that the parking lots, the off-street lots, are underutilized. In some cases, the library, of course, is not, but there are the other sort of number one and number 3 are underutilized, with as much as 50% or more available at any one time. 50 about 50 spaces are available at all times within 2 blocks of essentially every point in downtown. We found through the turnover, but mostly through public feedback, that there is a problem with our employees using the prime spaces on Main and dodging enforcement, which is a very common problem in a lot of communities. That the public feedback we received is that there are advantages and disadvantages of parallel and diagonal parking, which I want to talk about a little bit once we get to the sections. But there was a pretty clear consensus that there was a desire to calm traffic on Main Street and enhance the safety, the pedestrian crossing safety along Main, and activate the street life. Options and recommendations. So this section you see is the existing layout of Main. You have the diagonal striping is approximately 13 to 14 feet extended out from the curb. You have a 9 to 10 foot sidewalk and about a 17-foot drive lane. And that's basically because a standard diagonal parking spot is actually more like 17 or 18, but the striping stops short of that in downtown's case. So it makes your drive lane feel extra wide, even though some of that may be used for maneuvering of the parking vehicle, but you drive down that street and you feel like you're just on an expressway because you have 17-foot drive lanes. So the benefits of maintaining this parking scenario are the obvious. You don't lose any parking, which you do in the other cases, and you're maintaining a status quo of parking supply. But there's no gain in sidewalk space, and we feel that this is really important in terms of safety and traffic calming opportunities. You still have these very wide travel lanes that you need that space because of the maneuverability in and out of diagonal parking. Changing the angle, this was an option we looked at. So you have 45-degree parking now. You can change the diagonal of parking to be more like 30 degrees angled to the curb, and what you gain a little bit of space projected out from the curb lane, but you lose space in width along the curb. So you can gain a little sidewalk space, one and in some cases two feet on each side, but you lose quite a few parking spaces because the change in orientation takes away space from the curb lane. So one of the benefits though of changing the angle of parking is that you have improved visibility as you're backing out into the drive lane. You can look back and see what's coming a little easier than you can with the orientation of your spaces now. And obviously as the angle gets bigger, being, for example, 90 degrees, your visibility is absolutely at the worst. So, and then we did measurements of the 4 blocks along Main between Badger and everything of this in these future slides is related to 4 blocks of Main between Badger and Granite, and you would lose approximately 45 parking spaces by changing this angle, for only a gain of 1 to 2 feet of sidewalk space, which is not negligible, but that's a large parking loss for not as much of a gain in sidewalk space. And you still have this wide perceived travel lane because you still need that space to back out of the parking lot. This option shows changing angle parking to parallel parking. What we're showing is a 14-foot travel lane and an 8-foot parking lane, which is standard and has adequate room for even the larger vehicles. Basically, you can gain 8 to to 9 feet of sidewalk space by doing this. What we're showing in this graphic is a 14-foot travel lane because we put in sharrows, and in the industry, 14 feet with sharrows on more of an collector or arterial road is the minimum we like to go if it's shared with bike facility. So the benefit being it's still a reduced travel lane to calm the traffic. It's a safer parking condition with parallel parking. You're gaining that sidewalk space, but you're losing 60 to 65 parking spaces along those 4 blocks of Main Street. And I also wanted to point out that this is just an option, and it's what we're showing to be a shared bike lane, in our opinion, should be part of a larger bikeway plan, and that just putting in bike facility for 4 blocks of Waupaca is not probably the answer. So I put on there as a trade-off, it's not part of an interconnected system unless you're expecting to put in connecting bike facilities. 4 blocks of a bike facility really has no benefit to anyone. Then in a similar light, you can also fit in a separate bike lane, which gives more protection to your cyclist, takes a little bit away from the width you can gain in the sidewalk, but has a nice 12-foot at a maximum travel lane, which will nicely calm the traffic. And you can still get a 15-foot sidewalk. But, and this is the same condition on losing 60 to 65 parking spaces. And then we also wanted to look at some options where you mix it up. What you're seeing is one of the alternates that we came up with by offsetting the center lane, using the full 80 feet and getting 14.5 feet of sidewalk on each side, keeping diagonal parking on one side, and changing it to parallel parking on the other. You don't gain as much sidewalk space, but 14 feet is still a decent sized sidewalk, and you are losing half the parking spaces. Another alternate to this, which we don't show graphically, is actually 2 alternates. One could be you maintain the center line at the center of your right-of-way and alternate diagonal and parallel parking on a block-by-block basis. So in one block, parallel would be on the right and diagonal would be on the left. On the block north, you could reverse that. But then your sidewalk width is not consistent along the entire 4 block. You would have 14.5 sidewalk on one side for 1 block, and then it would be reduced to 9 to 10 feet on the next block, if that makes sense. And another alternate would be keeping diagonal parking on the 2 blocks between Badger and Fulton, or vice versa, keeping diagonal parking on the 2 blocks north of Fulton, because you have a lot lower traffic volumes and traffic conflicts, but changing to parallel parking on the 2 blocks south of Badger, where you could gain sidewalk width. But those are the 2 blocks from a traffic engineering perspective that worries me because of the higher traffic volumes. So gaining about 6 foot on average between those different options of the mix, but it does limit your traffic calming opportunities because of the wide traveling needed for diagonal parking. So recommendations. So this is the preliminary set of recommendations that overall we see will benefit downtown. We have no stance on how Main Street is carried out at this point, just presenting to you the benefits and trade-offs. But overall, we can recommend unfailingly that there should be improved walkability throughout downtown, and that can manifest as intersection improvements, improving your intersections with curb extensions, both with a parallel parking condition as well as a diagonal parking condition, maintaining the high visibility crosswalks that you have out there currently, and possibly even upgrading if it's to the different paver types, providing LPIs at the signalized locations. We feel that it will really improve your parking availability if the streetscape, as you move forward in your visioning, extending the streetscape east and west off of Main, sort of carrying that cohesion east and west off of Main will really help connect the blocks off of Main and increase the comfortability of walking from parking to Main Street. But we feel that calming traffic along Main is pretty important to the walkability of downtown, and seems to be very important to the community from the input we've received. Maintaining small corner radii, which you have currently, just as you go forward with engineering plans, just keeping that small corner radius, because that's what's really key in making it a pedestrian-friendly crossing by shortening those crossing distances. And then the recommendation of park once, obviously it's, by creating a parking system that everyone understands to be a parking system that consists of on-street parking and off-street parking lots, and that when you go downtown where you can find easy parking, where there's available parking, and creating this by improved wayfinding, which you do have parking signage currently, but wayfinding and clearly articulating what each block is meant to accommodate, what type of parker that each lot is meant to accommodate, defining those public lots, if you will, branding them to be this system that everyone understands to be. You have a place to park, and then you walk and you stroll. Again, focusing on those east-west connections off of Main. And then I wanted to point out that our analysis included a lot of public parking lots, and it seems through our key person interviews that shared parking between the public, between the private lots and users that aren't necessarily from that site is happening currently. So this may be a strategy with future growth, working out agreements with underutilized parking lots, which there are a lot of, using those to accommodate demand. And then I think this is the last slide. Encouraging turnover. So we feel that the 2-hour parking limit is appropriate. We looked hard at this because we did receive comments that people felt, why are you limiting our parking to 2 hours if you want us to come downtown and stroll for possibly longer than 2 hours? But because of the priority of those Main Street spaces and those spaces close to Main Street, we feel 2-hour parking limit is appropriate and shouldn't be changed. But possibly some closer, longer term options are appropriate. Perhaps designating some of the underutilized blocks that are 2-hour currently, making them 4-hour choices so that they aren't necessarily used by employees, but that you don't have to walk all the way to a lot to get. And then allowing sensitivity to individual needs. I think this will be something that you should keep in mind as you start to look at how you want to change Main Street. A lot of the feedback we got was related to the customers of these different businesses like to just drop in for 10 minutes, and they like the ease of just pulling in. Well, you can be very sensitive to those needs, and it requires enforcement, because having a time limit means nothing if you're not enforcing it. But accommodating through 15-minute parking requests if a business feels like that is useful to them, establishing a process that can be appropriate. I see in every downtown study that we do, coffee shops having 15-minute parking immediately outside. Loading is also important. You know, if a business doesn't have easy access to loading, having loading spaces available. We already touched on the distribution. So then enforcement. We always look at the option of pricing parking in a community, because really and truly it's the only way to equitably distribute your demand by forcing people from those prime spots into the not so prime spots. But in this case, because you really don't have a parking problem, that's not an appropriate measure at this time. But enforcement has to replace that pricing method. So one of the recommendations was maybe looking at different software that the police department uses that could read license plates and can effectively target employees that maybe are space jumping, and which can help free up your prime parking, which we hear is the problem. But that of course has to be very randomized, so it can't be a method where they come at 11 and every day. And that's it. So I would be happy to answer any questions, but I hope to come away with any and all of your feedback.
Comments, commissioners?
I think it's a very thorough study, and it's nice to see the community engagement involved with this. Obviously, we'd like to hear from the committee members and key people that were involved with that as well, to get their opinions. It's kind of interesting to see the surplus of parking. I kind of had a feeling the study would show that, but just the targeted locations of where that is and the average dailies that were applied. I was just wondering, was this the on-site, the 4 trips that were, the 4 times during the year that were out there, those were the 4 on-site trips that you had to do counts, actually?
Yeah, we were here 4 times.
Okay.
2 in August, 1 in October, 1 in December. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments, commissioners?
The online surveys, but I guess I was surprised at 285 responses as well. Could people take it more than once if they wanted to?
No, when we did that, Josh made sure that we set that up so that it was by IP address, so that you will not be able to take it more than once.
Except if I have 2 or 3 computers, different locations, I could take the quiz.
Alan, you always find
I didn't do
something.
that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it wasn't completely foolproof.
As long as I was thinking somebody at times it's bad.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. It's a good question.
The peak demand in particular is going to be something that the planners look at, I think, to assess how to apply the cross sections. I think the options given by the cross sections give a lot of latitude for design. The data seems to be there to support design ideas when they're developing their concepts. So also being on the downtown committee, I'd be interested to see how these two start to combine along with the economic impact studies that are going to be going on. So it's one piece of the puzzle, and I think it's very very thorough and informative for again, being on the downtown committee. I think it's very informative to put that one piece of information, then when we get the economic study as well, and then the start seeing concept plans, it's all going to start to blend together as to how these work in concert. But I think the traffic data, the accident information, all of that needs to come into account how we can make this safer, as well as more efficient and more appealing. That's the whole idea, I think, is on top of just reconstruction, is to have a more appealing downtown. And this is, I think, a good piece of data to help us proceed.
Before we go any further here, Brendan, this is more of a timing issue here. We have another item on our action items tonight. What's our anticipated time on that action item?
I would say probably no less or no more than 10 minutes.
Okay. Can we kind of hold off on this discussion and go to the next action item and then come back to this? And I'm just telling you that from a standpoint of these individuals that are here that want to deal with that, but also from my standpoint too, I'm going to have to be out of here by 6:45, so I want to make sure that I'm able to be able to hear this action item too. So if you can bear with us, people that are here tonight, you'll have plenty of time to discuss this with the other members if I have to go, but I want to get on to this next action item. Okay, let's go back then and finish or continue the discussion that we have on the Main Street and the parking. Where were we? So we could start here again.
Well, you know, John had just, I think, gone through and just, I just want to, I guess, apprise everyone. I mean, John is correct. This is one piece of the pie. I mean, you know, we just awarded the contracts for our downtown vision redevelopment plan along with our market consultants. They're going to take this data and this information into consideration. As many that are here this evening in the Plan Commission are aware, you know, we were awarded STP funding for potential use of reconstruction of Main Street. You know, but as we've discussed numerous times, that, you know, that may or may not come with consequences at the end of the day, and that may require us to go to an alternative parking scenario along Main Street. That was one of the, you know, big reasons why the city took the recommendation and proceeded forward ahead of time with getting a parking study done, so that we did have this data available when we start doing the downtown planning. The next couple months are going to be critical here. Our consultants are eager to get started, and have started, and will be coming back in April. But just for the Plan Commission and the community's benefit and understanding, you know, it is anticipated that the next couple months are going to be taking or diving in further than what we've already prepared with East Central Wisconsin. And our consultants for the engineering side of it are going to be working hand in hand with our planning consultants on preparing basically a detailed memo that's going to go to the DOT. You know, the information that's in here, the crash data, the amount of parking that's out there and everything else will go into that detailed memo that will go to the DOT's consultant at the end of the day. And you know, we're hoping or expecting that we'll hear back later, early to mid this fall, regarding whether or not we can utilize potential design exceptions along Main Street. We will not proceed forward with any design until we have at least a clear understanding from the DOT what they will and will not allow us to do, whether or not we will maintain angled parking or if we need to look at alternative scenarios. Again, there's going to be a lot of public meetings and public process through this, but I just want to make sure everyone's up to speed that, one, no decisions have been made. You know, again, this is a piece of a long-term project at the end of the day, but there are still many more months to go before we even come up with, I think, with the preferred cross-section for Main Street when we start looking to reconstruct this.
And you were talking about the STP funding driving some of those decisions. Is that correct? When you were saying about
it is
the cross-section, yeah.
Could drive.
Could drive.
drive,
yeah.
correct.
Some conditions may come along with that could.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And whether we have enough information that if we don't agree, that we can appeal to them.
Right.
To have that adjusted.
Right. Which is important. Yeah.
Again, you know, the other scenario at the end of the day is with the award of the STP funding, the city does not have to utilize it on Main Street. There are a couple other roads if they so choose. But we're going through this extensive data collection between this and the downtown plan with the anticipation of hopefully utilizing those funds. But again, that could be a long-term solution as well. And if we fund it locally, that would be on the taxpayers at the end of the day. It would come at an extreme cost. So, there's a lot of factors that have to be weighed out at the end of the day.
And if we are unable to use the STP money, it probably would set the timing back also at least a couple of years.
Yes.
Because of the financing arm that goes along with that.
Yep.
Comments on what you saw and what you think. I just maybe just set it up a little bit. First of all, I want to make it a point that although I have been the mayor for a number of years, I want to make sure that everybody understands that's watching and that on the commission that I do own 4 properties within this district too. So I'm just giving more of my personal opinion, I guess, as we go through this, and I'll try to not act completely as the mayor and on this. But things that I saw, and I'll just get it started there, is the widening of the sidewalk. Is that something that when we do this, is that something that we think is important? The loss of parking spaces, if we go to anything but the angle parking, is that important to us, that we might lose those? Is parallel parking really safer than angle parking? I'm just thinking outside, especially to people that are not used to angle parking. I can't remember the last time I parallel parked. So yeah. Is it really that much safer, when you have to turn one way or the other? So, those are just a couple of the observations, and I did like that, it could be a block by block situation, because there are different businesses on different blocks, so it doesn't have to be exactly the same, although the continuity might make sense to continue the same. Cut down on pedestrian crossing space. Has there ever been discussion about that wide length there? Couldn't we just similar to what they did if you've been in Waupaca, where they actually have it come out a little bit from the sidewalk, so that reduces the space that they're waiting for. I'm sure Justin would really love that, and Roger Hanson, but those are thoughts that we should, and these are just real brief things that I saw as I was sitting here. I was not part of your downtown committee, but again, I think I was just saying this just to get it started. I thought I had one other comment, but I can't remember it right now. So, commissioners, I'll let you speak if you want to. Otherwise, we'll let the audience speak to us too if they'd like to just talk about it. Obviously, no decisions are being made tonight. This is a part of a long-range plan to find out what we really want to do in that area.
Yeah. One more thing I'll add is I think what has come from the traffic study is that all the options are still available to us, and nothing's really been identified to take as too much of a deficit, as too much of a strain on the demand of parking for years to come. So it's for your consultant to consider that the options are still on the table. A lot of those options were discussed of bump outs, of course. That needs further discussion, but
I'm making bumper stickers with the mayor's name on it after that one.
Bump out bumper sticker.
Wait till after election time.
But those were all supported by, or at least wanting to be examined by the committee, the downtown committee. So it's very supported by this document. So it's helpful to have this technical piece to help us move along in the decision making.
We've got several of the members here. I would like to continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to hear from
Sure.
you guys, and just on the podium and express your thoughts.
If you would, since we do record this and we are on TV, just give your name and who you're representing tonight.
I'm Kent Pegorsh. My wife and I own Main Street Marketplace. There's 4 storefronts there, and then we own the Passport Travel Building, 104 North Main. So a total of 5 storefronts. So we have quite a vested interest in that corner there.
I Connections.
I Connections it now is I Wireless.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Couple things with the study. One, 74% of the people would walk 2 blocks to get to their destination. I might question a little bit how that was gotten to. I know we had some exercises at one of our committee meetings, and that there was a little bit of confusion in those exercises that may have skewed that number. But I'm sure some of that probably comes from also people that question downtown. But I know that very few of our customers, maybe 20%, would walk 2 blocks to get to our store. I don't know how many customers would walk 2 blocks to get to one of your businesses downtown. I think that was a little bit of a fact that shouldn't be highlighted as much, maybe, or maybe should be looked at how we got that number. I was a little bit surprised to see the outdoor cafe area added into the streetscape again, because I thought through the committee meetings we kind of decided maybe that dedicating part of the sidewalk to an outdoor cafe area maybe wasn't a reasonable use of sidewalk and street area. I've been down here for 30 years now on Main Street, and there are very few days out of the year where you can put a cafe out in front, and either the wind or the rain or the cold or our seasons aren't very friendly except for maybe a few weeks in the summertime. So to dedicate a huge portion of our sidewalks to a cafe for 365 days a year may or may not be the best idea. I was surprised at how few of the accidents in 3 years, I think it was, were related to parking. I think it was 13 or 16 of them. And I guess it was related to parking, and I wonder, is that really related to parking, or was it related to backing out into the street, and is that related to the traffic speed on Main Street? And if we extended those lines on the angle parking out to make the street appear narrower, maybe put in some bike lanes, the appropriate scheme, maybe that would help make the angle parking safer and slow the speed of the traffic down, because it would make the lanes appear narrower. And these are just thoughts I had as she was presenting the parking study. I have not talked to anyone who wants to lose the parallel or the angle parking. Everyone seems to love the immediate gratification of pulling into there. I question whether or not it really is more dangerous, if we control the speeds on Main Street. That's my comments.
Thanks, Kent. Thank you. Anybody else that would like to make some comments? Again, Brennan,
I'd like to address the issue of angle parking. It's certainly easy to pull into angle parking, but getting back out, invariably when I park angle downtown, it seems there's always an SUV next to me when I come back out, and with darkened windows, and I cannot see.
Just got to gun it
to back out. I mean, I'm really leery about pulling out.
I agree.
And the traffic, I don't think moves that fast on Main Street in that area of downtown. At least that's not my experience. It's just very difficult to see traffic coming. So that's a point that I would make.
I agree.
Yeah, we had a little bit of that discussion yesterday too, and take it for what it's worth, but the number of accidents we had, and talking to the chief yesterday, he thought was fairly high for the area that we have, but he also said they're pretty minor because of the speed that the people are going at.
You are correct, Mayor. I mean, that's only a 3-year snapshot at the end of the day, and those are the ones that are accounted for. Basically people pulling out and backing into a car, or a car coming around the corner. If you look at the map that was presented, a lot of them are right around the corners because there's very poor visibility around there. But we also discussed during the meeting that that's just what's written down, where we've had accidents. Doesn't account for the close calls either, and I think that's where you'd see a lot higher number at the end of the day. But we can't, you can't account for that at the end of the day, the close calls that happen. But
I think still the big question in my mind is the number of parking spaces that you would lose by going from that, and that would have to be addressed, obviously. And then maybe the distance that people would have to walk then to get to those storefronts. Those are the two biggest questions. In my mind, I don't think I have any issues with parallel parking as long as I didn't lose any parking spaces and I didn't have to walk any further. you know, so.
I did want to address one of the comments that Ken brought up, and that was, we never eliminated, in my understanding, and again, I have other members here from the Downtown Vision Committee, but I do not remember ever eliminating the idea of not having potential for cafes or sidewalk sales out there. I think there was at least the idea was to have extended sidewalks to provide those opportunities.
Right.
One of the biggest things that we have is we cannot look at this plan as what's out there today. Understand that we do have some very long vested business owners, that will hopefully, the next generation will, take over the business and be there. But we also have to worry about the, what's going to occur long term, and that, it may be a retail store today, but it could be a restaurant tomorrow. So, I mean, we need to, as we look at this plan for the downtown, vision plan and everything else, take into consideration, the future of our downtown, not just looking at the snapshot that we have at this moment. I mean, the parking that we have in front of you is literally a snapshot of our community today. We did, and I've been working with Kelly and Sam Schwartz on this as well. I try to identify, how do we forecast this? We really don't have an idea of how to forecast this. We just did a mid, medium, and max at the moment. But we are going to be, as we go through the visioning exercise, we will be working with Sam Schwartz to rerun the numbers at the end of the day. Again, we don't know exactly how much development may or may not occur in the future downtown, and that may or may affect how many parking stalls are available. So, again, this is what's in front of you. What was presented today is a snapshot of our current business makeup and structure in our downtown area. But we will have some further analysis as we proceed through the process of, what happens if development, does occur and there's some redevelopment of some parcels or other buildings within the area, or uses change. A retail store has definitely a different use than what a restaurant does at the end of the day. So, as I've always spoken long term, is that this is a plan for the future, and that we need to take into consideration any and all options at the end of the day.
May I?
Go ahead.
Terry Schultz, I'm representing the Waupaca Area Chamber of Commerce, but I also live in the city, Foxfire Court. I guess I have a question maybe for you or Brennan. Is there any study or backup data to communities that have changed their parking scenarios, and has it been positive, negative? Is there anything to back up changes that you're suggesting? I think I know what Brennan would like. I think we all kind of figured that one out. But I think it would be nice for all of us to know if there has been some type of studies or something that's done afterwards to show that it hasn't been a huge problem, or yes, it was a huge problem, that type of thing.
Jerry, I would like to address her question as well as a couple other clarifications. But, we've gone through the exercise of kind of determining case studies. The problem, and there are many communities that have done it, the problem with comparing one community to another is it's all about what is the other supply and what's your demand. And so any information that I could give you on those communities isn't necessarily applicable. I will say that feedback that we have heard from the communities that we've done, from staff of the communities that we've looked at, their feedback is, people are very resistant to the diagonal parking because of the maneuverability, and that goes away fairly quickly once the condition is there, when it's the only choice. But in terms of supply and demand and how effective sort of relocating that supply and demand is, I have no information because it's so case specific, I guess. One other thing that I wanted to, or two other things that I wanted to just address, the 2-block walk shed that you had asked about, that was strictly, the percentage was strictly pulled from the online survey data, where the question was, how far are you willing to walk from your parking spot to your final destination? And the choices being under 1 block, 1 to 2 blocks, 2 to 3 blocks. And so that was where that number came from. So it wasn't subjective in any way. And then I did want to mention just the angle parking and bike lanes. If there's nothing that I can leave you with besides don't put in any bike facilities behind angle parking. As a traffic engineer, we hate angle parking because of it's a pretty well documented safety issue, and we will not ever recommend a bike facility behind angle parking because of the dangers of pulling out. You know, it's one thing if you pull out into a vehicle, but when you're pulling out into a bicyclist, it's a whole nother ballgame. So those were, I think, the comment about narrowing the appearance of the travel lane, that was a thought that actually crossed my mind and I like a lot. Part of the reason that it feels so wide on Main Street with your diagonal parking is because your parking striping is substandard. If it actually extended out to what it should be, which is 17 to 18 feet, it would make your travel lane feel quite a bit more narrow, which then would help to calm traffic. And you know, our analysis did not include any type of speed data. It only looked at volumes, strictly volumes, and public perception, and that was that was the only analysis, I guess, that I was presenting. I have no information whatsoever that people are actually speeding. It's just the perception that people feel traffic goes faster, and the documentation that there is more traffic along that stretch of Main Street than other stretches where people feel slightly more comfortable.
So you can along Main Street, the amount of traffic on North Main and South.
It's average daily traffic available through Wisconsin DOT. It's a public website that you can go, and they do the traffic counts and they provide it to the traveling public. So that's just what we pulled. We did not do traffic counts. We only did parking counts. The traffic numbers that you see in the presentation were directly from I think they were 2014.
I was in a community not too long ago that had angle parking where you had to back into it. Is that something that was considered at all?
I just didn't want to die up here. In the transportation world, we love it, but we get crucified when we suggest it. It's a much safer condition because you see as you pull out what you're pulling out into, and in that case, that's a situation where if people want to maintain your supply, they will convert to back and diagonal. It's much more popular on the East Coast than anywhere else. It's been very successfully used in Washington, D.C. specifically. Other than that, though, I don't know a lot of communities that have overcome the public negativity of it and actually implemented.
The community I was thinking of was Pottstown, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And I think it's probably about a 25 or 30,000 population, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we like it.
What'd you think of it? Just
I used it. In
as
fact,
an
I thought it
opinion.
was good, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a wide enough space that it was not hard to maneuver back into it.
right. And the learning curve on that versus parallel parking.
No, I
I mean,
yeah.
because that's really
It's
what
actually,
we're talking about.
it's
is-
actually easier.
right. It's an easier
parallel.
maneuver, but
It's an
the
easier maneuver.
perceiving it, I think that there's a learning curve in the community of, are we
and that was-
driving the wrong way and stuff like that. So.
I mean, and John brings it up, and Alan, I wanted, during when East Central was doing their study, we brought that up as one of the parking options, early
Yeah.
on in the process. And Eric would remember, I think, as well. I mean, we looked at it.
Yep.
The vision committee, I think, we didn't throw it out the door, or out the window, but it was one that was
Right.
lower on the totem pole of whether or not it would be accepted here. I mean, you are correct. The East and West Coast are the ones that mainly utilize it. I've utilized it in San Francisco and in, Portland, but the closest to the Midwest that is using it right now is Iowa or Nebraska. And again, I think, it's twofold. One, you have to look at your population, and two, I mean, we are an aging community here. So I think something that we'll definitely consider and take a look at. Actually, funny, we just talked about it yesterday in the mayor's meeting that we had with the department heads. It was, same discussion we had, but
I like the idea, but how do you stop people, because you can just back up until they something, like curb or whatever it's gonna be. How do you stop the back end from being all over, on the sidewalk several feet?
Well, same way that you pull up in a front end, a lot of people just pull up till they hit to the curb. They back in, they just pull up till they hit the curb. But you could also put in stops, parking stops.
Eric, to follow up on that, I mean, if you look at some of the cross sections that were presented, there's a reason why you have a furniture or a planting area that's 2, 3, 4 feet wide, is because of those scenarios. Whether you're if you're angle parking, or even if you're pulling straight in, you have that planting area for that buffer for a reason, so that people, you have your walk zone, you potentially have your cafe or area where you can do sidewalk sales, but you have that furniture and landscape zone specifically. One of the main reasons is for that reason, so you're not walking in through the cars. Right now, to challenge what we have, I mean, you could utilize the light poles, but the way our sidewalks and in downtown is currently designed, a lot of people walk right where the cars are.
So, I mean, it's basically it is an option with even the combination parallel angle. All you have to do is flip the angle in the car.
I mean, technically, it's exactly what you have now.
Right.
You don't gain much sidewalk. You don't gain any sidewalk space,
So
but
from
you don't lose any parking. You're just reversing that.
Right. So from the cross sections that we have, we can kind of visualize that opportunity with what you gave us. And then there's the mixed angled parallel that could also be reversed parallel. So still very flexible.
Program look at it back then. As many people as that as there are back out.
I don't know the answer to that.
What was the question?
I would guess
Program.
Is
people are
The
pretty
DOT with
hesitant to use
STP
it.
back end angle better than. I think in a scenario, I mean, we haven't addressed that with the DOT yet. WSDOT and most DOTs are pretty hard-nosed when it comes to angle parking in general, whether it is the way we have it now or back in. I believe that some state DOTs are lessening up on some of those where you are looking at the back end parking, but I think that would be the only way that they really would see angle parking long term or approve it.
I think WSDOT's standard is they have parallel. That's standard.
Yep.
So anything outside of that would be take an exception, design exception, which is what Brennan hinted to earlier. So these consultants we are hiring for our engineering would help us with that.
Timeline? Is that funding, figuring out what they're gonna try and make us do?
Yep. So the general guide or timeline that we have moving forward is this is a big piece of the pie that'll be hopefully adopted by the council next month. SCH, who's our engineering consultant out of Appleton, will be reviewing this information. There's a technical memo that needs to be prepared, and that technical memo is going to be prepared by June or July of this year. They are working in tandem with our planning consultant. The planning consultant is going to be doing their design studio in June, so more than likely that technical memo is going to be prepared in July and presented to the DOT in July, August. The actual start of the 30% design plans we don't anticipate starting until about October of this year, at the earliest, based upon the schedule. So I mean, there are a couple months in there that, Eric and East Central and I and the city could only took that plan as far as we could. I mean, we have consultants now to really dive into basically, at ground level and taking a look at all this. I mean, we're not going to throw out all the work that was done. We're going to enhance and build upon that at the end of the day. But again, the technical memo is a key piece in this process. I will say that, the city is very fortunate in the consultants that we have on board, especially SCH. Each region of the state has a consultant that the DOT utilizes for review of these type of design exceptions, STB funding, and everything else. We are fortunate that SCH is actually one of the consultants that the DOT contracts with. They don't contract for our specific area, but SCH does oversee another portion of the region when it comes to STP funding and design exceptions. So they're very well versed in this field, in my opinion, when looking at this, and they are going to put their best foot forward and try to get a design exception. But again, it's an uphill battle, and it will be a challenge at the end of the day. So having this data and the future data that's going to come will hopefully only strengthen our opportunity to maybe seek a design exception. But again, it's going to be an uphill challenge at the end of the day.
Going back to your timeline, in the conceptual development of the planning, is there more, I guess, for people here in attendance, is there more opportunity for input as we develop that?
Yep, there's
That'll
going to
be known?
there's going to be public meetings every single month. There's going to be
Updates.
in short order. There's going to be a project website that's going to be launched here within the next couple of weeks. That people, as we move through the process, there is going to be a steering committee that the mayor and the council will adopt here within the next couple of weeks. So there is going to be a steering committee, but every single time the consultants are in town, there is some form of a public engagement meeting.
Okay.
We are looking at other options to get the word out as well and seek feedback. So one of the main reasons why we hired the planning consultant that we did was because of the public outreach and the public process that they brought to the table at the end of the day. And I think, as I see Eric's head shaking here at the end of the day, Eric served on that review committee along with Justin and a couple other people. Terry actually right behind me as well. I believe we have extreme confidence in our planning consultant to really engage the public.
Good. Me too. So.
I have one for Kelly. In your professional opinion, of all these streetscape options, which one or two do you think would serve our community the best?
Well, I think that the numbers clearly demonstrate that it won't put by converting to parallel parking, that it won't put in a demand burden as it is currently, as your demand is currently, that would be detrimental to the community. What I think deserves further study as you get into the redevelopment concepts and plans of your downtown is, where is this redevelopment happening, and is this in key areas where we already have demand that's approaching 85%, and do we need to look at specific measures to address that location specific demand. But from a traffic engineering and parking planning perspective, we prefer eliminating diagonal parking strictly for safety reasons. And the parking data that we see doesn't indicate, my professional opinion, indicate that you cannot accommodate the decrease in supply by 60 plus spaces.
Thank you.
Anything else? Comments? Questions? Anything else? Okay, well, I guess as someone that was on the committee that chose Schwartz study, I think we made a great job and a lot of detail for us to look at, and all over here forward in making the decisions that we want to make for this project. So all your efforts there. Everybody that came out tonight, see you very much, and we'll be looking for a motion to adjourn.
Reports? We're good.
The agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, the reports and.
I think I basically gave you guys my report and update on the downtown master plan and everything else for the month. So
Okay.
good.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Keelan, second by Kinnear. Adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Adjourn at 7:00.